have another print disability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Corrine, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the June 15th, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Thank you for joining us today. The highlights under business and finance are: Trump's deal with Iran is set to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, but how quickly it can arrest a steep decline in oil stockpiles will determine the trajectory of energy prices in the coming weeks. Entrepreneur Charlie Jarvis has been seeking a presidential pardon for her criminal conviction for defrauding J.P. Morgan Chase when she sold her company to the bank for $175 million. Retail purchases of SpaceX shares on the day of its public debut totaled roughly $118 million, making it the biggest IPO for individuals in recent history. Longtime SpaceX executives, short-term employees, college endowments, and venture capital firms emerged as winners from the company's flotation. America's philanthropic organizations are hoping for an influx of cash from publicly minded new millionaires and billionaires minted by blockbuster IPOs like SpaceX's. A federal ban on software with ties to China in internet-connected cars is flawed and unlikely to keep data secure, experts said. NVIDIA joined Abridge, a maker of an AI note-taking app for doctors, to train an artificial intelligence model tailored for healthcare. Relative bargains are still to be found in some Chinese tech shares, even as the AI frenzy swells companies' valuations elsewhere in Asia and in the U.S. Now for the key articles under the Worldwide section. Iran and the U.S. agreed on a peace deal, the countries said, claiming a breakthrough after nearly 4 months of conflict that created global political and economic turmoil. Anthropic met with government officials and dispatched top technical staff to Washington in pursuit of a deal to end export restrictions on its most powerful artificial intelligence models. The U.S. military killed a leader of the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua in an unusual joint operation with Caracas, Trump said. Trump said that he would appoint one of his personal lawyers, James McDonald, as Manhattan's top federal prosecutor. A measles outbreak in Utah has been spreading for nearly a year, putting the U.S. on a path to lose its long-standing measles elimination status. British forces boarded and detained a sanctioned tanker suspected of being part of the Russian fleet shipping oil in violation of international sanctions. The Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts said it removed Trump's name from the building hours after it failed to meet a court-ordered deadline to do so. Swiss voters rejected a proposal to impose a hard constitutional cap on the country's population, averting an economic shock and a severe diplomatic rift with the EU. The picture on today's front page appears to take place at night, and in the background, the White House is illuminated, and in the foreground, a boxing match is taking place on the White House lawn. And that headline reads, "Fight Night Kicks Off on the White House Lawn." The caption, "Birthday Bout." Mixed martial arts fans watch Diego Lopez battle Steve Garcia in an Ultimate Fighting Championship lightweight fight at the White House. The event coincided with the 80th birthday of President Trump, who was on hand. U.S.-Iran reach deal to end war. By Josh Dawsey, Annette Pellid, and Benoit Falcon. Pakistan says both parties will sign the peace accord in Switzerland Friday. Iran and the U.S. have agreed on a peace deal, the countries said on Sunday, a breakthrough after nearly 4 months of conflict that created global political and economic turmoil. President Trump, in an interview earlier Sunday with the Wall Street Journal, hours before he was set to attend a large-scale mixed martial arts fight on the White House lawn, said the deal would be signed electronically by himself or Vice President J.D. Vance on Sunday. Pakistani negotiators said a formal signing would come this week. Following intensive talks, we are pleased to announce that the peace deal between the United States of America and Islamic Republic of Iran has been reached, said Shehbaz Sharif, Prime Minister of lead mediator Pakistan. Both sides have declared the immediate and permanent termination of military operations on all fronts, including in Lebanon. The official signing ceremony will be on Friday in Switzerland, Sharif said on his social media account. Trump, in a 5:29 p.m. social media post, wrote that the deal with the Islamic Republic of Iran is now complete. Congratulations to all. I hereby fully authorize the toll-free opening of the Strait of Hormuz and simultaneously herewith authorize the immediate removal of the United States naval blockade. Ships of the world, start your engines. Let the oil flow. The government in Tehran later confirmed the deal had been struck. Agreement reached, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian said in a post on his X account. Greetings to Diplomacy General, he said, under a picture of Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. Some have described the agreement as a memorandum of understanding that would set up further talks. The agreement paves the way for a 60-day period of negotiations over Tehran's nuclear program, which the U.S. suspects could be used to develop a nuclear weapon. In exchange for curbs on the program, Iran expects access to billions of dollars of cash blocked abroad and an end to sanctions that have stifled its economy. The pact includes commitments to end the conflict between the U.S. and Iran. The Islamic Republic is set to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, while the U.S. is expected to end its blockade of Iran ports. Trump's war has driven up gasoline prices for the U.S. consumers. Trump expressed no urgency to extract nuclear material from Iran, saying that would come later. We'll get the nuclear dust later on when we're ready to go in and do it. I'd say over the next month or two, there's no rush, he said. He called it harmless. Trump said he wasn't as concerned about changing Iran's regime as some of his critics have been. As far as regime change, I never cared about regime change. This is the third group we've dealt with, and this is the most rational group yet. The interview came hours after Trump expressed frustration with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for an exchange of fire between Israel and Hezbollah, which appeared to almost scuttle the sensitive talks. The U.S. and Israel launched attacks against Iran on February 28th, but relations between the White House and Israel have been strained since then over conflicting objectives. Bibi should not have done that, Trump said about Sunday's strikes inside Lebanon. I don't like it at all. They fired a couple of small missiles and missed their mark by a lot, adding they have to fire back, then he'll fire back, then the whole thing never stops in the Middle East. But Trump claimed Netanyahu was supportive of a deal. Bibi is okay with it, he said. Why is it good for Bibi? Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon under any circumstances. Netanyahu has expressed concerns about the terms of any potential deal. The conflict between Israel and Hezbollah militants, backed by Iran, has become a persistent hurdle to ending the Iran war. Similar Israeli strikes have led to tense calls between Trump and Netanyahu in recent weeks. The preliminary deal had faced opposition from hardliners in Iran and by many in Israel. Iran's top diplomat, Abbas Araghchi, faced street protest and public criticism on Saturday by hardliners who accused him of giving too many concessions to the U.S. We will continue with other front page articles. Oil market is seen taking months to recover. Shippers are likely to remain cautious about transiting the Strait of Hormuz, by Colin Eaton, Benoit Morin, and Michael R. Gordon. President Trump's deal with Iran is set to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, but how quickly it can arrest a steep decline in oil stockpiles will determine the trajectory of energy prices in the coming weeks. For more than 15 weeks, the U.S. and other countries around the world have had to dip into oil tanks, salt caverns, and strategic reserves to make up for the millions of barrels of oil trapped behind the strait. Now the stocks are nearing critical levels, and energy executives say that without an influx of more oil, prices will have to surge to stop the run on supplies. U.S. oil prices were down 5.5% to $80.26 a barrel on Sunday evening at about 11 Eastern Time. They have fallen more than 25% from early April when they approached $113. Gasoline prices at the pump have fallen too. Mike Wirth, chief executive of Chevron, has repeatedly warned on TV that the supply crunch will soon manifest itself around the world. Neil Chapman, the number 2 at ExxonMobil, has said the U.S. is approaching unheard of inventory levels. Other executives of Quantum Capital Group say it's going to get ugly. The world has never had to destroy 10 million barrels a day of oil demand, referring to the crude production not making it to global markets. Relief could be on the way. The U.S. and Iran agreed Sunday to a deal set to be signed Friday in Switzerland that would quickly reopen the strait through which 20% of the world's petroleum typically passes. But even if that deal holds, it would likely take months for the oil market to return to normal. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Anthropic races to resolve export curbs. Some researchers say administration overreacted to Amazon. By Amrith Ramkumar and Robert McMillan, Washington. Anthropic is rushing to resolve its latest conflict with the Trump administration, meeting with officials and dispatching top technical staff to Washington over the weekend in pursuit of a deal to end export restrictions on its most powerful artificial intelligence models. The Trump administration on Friday banned foreign governments, companies, and individuals from using Anthropic's Fable 5 and Mythos 5 models, which prompted Anthropic to shut off access to everyone in order to comply. Anthropic said at the time that many foreign governments, companies, and individuals, including some foreign-born Anthropic employees, fell under the restriction. Administration officials and Anthropic leaders spent several hours on calls Saturday discussing Fable 5, a slimmed-down version of Anthropic's powerful Mythos model meant for the general public, people familiar with the discussion said. The discussions included Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick and National Cyber Director Sean Crane Cross, as well as Tom Brown, an Anthropic co-founder who is the company's chief computing officer, and Sarah Heck, the company's head of public policy, they said. On Sunday, a group of cybersecurity notables signed a letter calling for the administration to lift the export controls. This action has taken the best models away from defenders, created market uncertainty, and risked America's AI leadership without any real risk to justify it, the letter says. People close to the company and the administration said both parties are interested in resolving the issue and restoring access to the cutting-edge models, but it isn't clear what a solution would entail. Anthropic technical experts and government security researchers coming together was seen by some administration officials as a step toward a compromise. The weekend discussions continue months of tension between the administration and one of America's leading AI labs over how new cutting-edge technologies are used and regulated. The Trump administration has recently taken more steps to control the fast-evolving industry. Investors pile into all things on space by Micah Maidenberg. It isn't just SpaceX. Encouraged by the Elon Musk-led company's successes and steadily climbing valuation, venture capitalists and private market investors are stepping up bets on space startups, hoping to find the next breakout stars. Venture funding for U.S. space technology firms, excluding SpaceX, shot up to $7.1 billion in 2025 from $2.5 billion a year earlier, according to data provider PitchBook. Last year's haul was the strongest since companies raised almost $4 million in 2021. More investments have rolled in this year. Observable Space, focused on laser communications and sensing, recently raised $90 million. Ground system startup Northwood Space pulled in $100 million. And Cesium Astro, a maker of space systems and electronics, recorded $470 million in equity and financing. There's just so much more you can do from space, said John Gedmark, chief executive of Astronis, a maker of small satellites orbiting more than 22,000 miles from Earth. The company recently raised capital from Franklin Templeton and others. Investors are finding there are real business models in space and money to be made, Gedmark said. Last week, public market investors poured $75 billion into Musk's space and artificial intelligence enterprise in a record-setting initial public offering, a stunning milestone for a company that almost went out of business during its early years. SpaceX's IPO also sealed a victory for the company's long-term shareholders who believed in the ideas that once sounded more like science fiction but now have come to pass, including building a fleet of roughly 10,000 satellites. Deep fake nudes transform bullying. Parents and schools are struggling to protect victims as AI tools proliferate. By Georgia Wells and Rachel Wolf. AI has made it trivially easy for anyone with a phone to digitally undress people and post the content online. Called explicit deep fakes, these images and sometimes videos are unleashing a new form of bullying and harassment among young people. Artificial intelligence nudified tools are evolving and multiplying. Laws cracking down on them have lagged behind cases and aren't always enforced. Schools don't know how to handle them. Parents are left trying to help their children regain a sense of safety as they try to scrub the images from the internet. Megan Mancini in Hingham, Mass. wished she had a playbook for dealing with the issue. Last year, a boy created a deep fake image of her middle school daughter and shared it on Snapchat with other kids, who then took screenshots and shared them in the hallways during school. The local police said the best way to get the photo offline was to upload it to a website that specializes in removing deep fakes. But because the image depicted a naked minor, federal law prevented the police from giving her the image electronically. They gave her a black and white printout of the image instead. Mancini said the police told her that her daughter would likely need to testify if she pressed charges, and said the boy would face limited consequences because he was a minor. Mancini filed a Title IX complaint against Hingham Public Schools After a nearly 5-month investigation, the district sent a letter saying that there was insufficient evidence to conclude the behavior occurred in the school's district. The boy, who has admitted to creating the image, faced no formal disciplinary consequences. In May, the federal government began enforcing the Take It Down Act, which was passed with bipartisan support last year and made it a federal crime to knowingly publish or threaten to publish non-consensual intimate images, including those created by AI. It requires platforms to remove content within 48 hours of receiving a notification from a victim. The European Union, meanwhile, is looking to ban nudify apps outright. Some states have criminalized deep-fake nudes, but the laws often aren't enforced. Cases still are underreported, under-investigated, and under-prosecuted, said Carrie Goldberg, one of the first lawyers to pursue cases of revenge porn and deep fakes. Other articles from within the paper follow. The Knicks win the NBA title. New York fell behind in Game 5, but rallied to secure its first NBA championship since 1973. By Robert O'Connell, San Antonio. It was always going to require a miracle. If the New York Knicks, the most dismal, down-and-out franchise of the past half-century, were going to win their first NBA championship since 1973, it would require a zillion things to break just right. Every ball would have to bounce their way for them to reach the top of the basketball world after 53 years of waiting. So it was fitting that Saturday night, as they aimed to clinch the NBA Finals, the Knicks flirted with disaster again and fell behind by 15 points in the second half. It was only then that New York mounted a furious comeback. Superstar point guard Jalen Brunson converted impossible layups and crashed to the floor for a loose ball, finishing with 45 points. The Knicks' steely defense held Victor Wembanyama to just 3 points in the fourth quarter. And when the dust settled, New York had made history by beating the San Antonio Spurs 94-90 to become NBA champions again. Boom towns spark division in Europe. New investments in French and British towns bring jobs and resentment. By Sune Engel Rasmussen. Barrow-in-Furness, England. Europe's defense boom promised to revive struggling towns across the continent. Locals hoped a fresh injection of money would help rejuvenate communities that have withered for decades. Instead, it is sparking division and resentment. In Barrow-in-Furness, an impoverished shipbuilding town in northwestern England, a multi-billion-dollar contract to build nuclear submarines has highlighted inequality and pulled workers from other professions. Residents of Bergerac, a cobblestone French town famous for its wines, complain that all they have received from a revamped explosive factory are empty promises and drones in their skies. Such tensions across Europe are creating headwinds for politicians trying to convince voters that they must invest even more in defense to counter Russia and China, often at the expense of social spending. The fortunes of Barrow have over a century been tied to the fate of its shipyard. When military orders dried up at the end of the Cold War, this town of some 67,000 people became one of Britain's most deprived areas. Now the shipyard is bustling again. The UK government awarded a $5.4 billion contract to the British defense company BAE Systems to build up to 12 AUKUS-class nuclear-powered attack submarines in Barrow. The order added around 5,000 jobs to BAE's workforce, which grew in recent years to build Dreadnought-class nuclear ballistic missile submarines and 7 Astute-class submarines for the Royal Navy. BAE now employs 14,000 people in Barrow. Starmer has called Barrow a blueprint for what defense spending can do. King Charles III conferred royal status on the port of Barrow for its contribution to national defense. But the salaries and benefits offered by BAE draw workers from other professions, leaving the town bereft of mechanics, driving instructors, and nurses. On a recent evening in a local pub, 2 builders asked other patrons for recommendations for tradesmen and were told they had to wait several weeks. The sudden influx of money and workers has sent real estate prices soaring. It's making the town and it's breaking the town, David Richards, the pub's bartender, said. It's a town of haves and have-nots, said Michelle Schragram, the town's lawmaker in Parliament. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the editorial page, the Warsh era begins at the Fed. His first move may be a much-needed change in communications. Kevin Warsh presides over his first Federal Open Market Committee meeting as Federal Reserve Chairman this week, and his eventual reform list is long. Reduce the balance sheet, review the Keynesian bias in its economic models, keep the Fed out of fiscal policy, and more. But his first priority, and an important one, is likely to be overhauling the way the Fed communicates. Few innovations since 2008 have been as counterproductive as the adoption of forward guidance as a policy tool. Federal officials came to believe that by giving investors a heads up on the central bank's intentions for short-term interest rates, it can steer longer-term rates in the economy as well. But the constant jammering, long policy statements, press conferences after every FOMC meeting, nonstop speeches by Fed officials, and above all, the quarterly summary of economic projections has exposed how little the Fed understands about the economy and trapped officials in errant policies. It's hard to remember when the Fed wasn't this talkative. Yet, until 1990s, the central bank cultivated an air of inscrutability. Officials didn't even release announcements when they adjusted their overnight policy interest rate. The Fed played down its periodic publication of limited economic forecast, which investors generally ignored. Officials gradually started publishing statements of policy decisions after 1994. A fuller explanation of FOMC's reasoning arrived under Alan Greenspan in 1999 when officials began explaining what came to be known as the balance of risks, whether they thought tightening or easing was likely to be more appropriate in the future. The oversharing went into overdrive after 2008. After cutting rates to near zero and ramping up quantitative easing, Ben Bernanke lit on communication as a policy tool in its own right. Mr. Bernanke was eager to persuade investors that he'd keep rates low for an extended period. Hence the adoption of an explicit 2% inflation target in 2012 to reassure investors that the Fed wouldn't tighten if inflation was below that level. In late 2007, the Fed had published the first iteration of what would eventually become the quarterly projections, the infamous dot plots, depicting FOMC officials' anonymous guesses about future interest rate moves, appeared in early 2012. In 2011, Mr. Bernanke began holding press conferences after some FOMC meetings, and the Gab Fest became a fixture after every meeting in 2019 under Jerome Powell. Along the way, Fed officials began delivering more and more speeches between meetings. Investors and journalists scrutinized these orations for clues about future policies. This has been good for journalists, but not for the Fed. Its quarterly projections are notorious for predictions about GDP growth, unemployment, and inflation that turn out to be wrong. The Fed's sages badly overestimated economic growth in 2011 and 2012, predicting about 3% in December of the previous years when the economy grew only by 1.5%. But then it underestimated growth in 2017 and 2019 as it failed to appreciate the impact of the Trump tax reform. Its greatest recent mistake was underestimating inflation in 2021 and 2022 by a factor of about 3. Hat tip to our contributor, Mickey Levy, for the numbers. And because forward guidance encourages investors to react to what the Fed will do, rather than sending market signals about economic conditions, officials mute a source of information that could inform policy making. One reason Mr. Powell was so slow to respond to accelerating inflation after the pandemic was that the Fed previously had committed to lower for longer interest rates. He reinforced this in August 2020 when the Fed promised to tolerate above 2% inflation to make up for periods of slower price rises. A fear of spooking markets with unanticipated rate hikes deterred rapid action to fight inflation. Forward guiding Fed officials kept calling inflation transitory, a word that will haunt the Fed for years. Forward guidance also drags the Fed into politics, since officials find it hard to resist opining on fiscal and other debates to explain their monetary views. Mr. Warsh may not be able to deter other Fed governors from popping off in speeches, but he could set an example by ending the dot plot era, limiting his press conferences, and focusing his public statements on major policy turns in the semi-annual Humphrey Hawkins testimony to Congress. Mr. Warsh has said he welcomes debate over monetary policy, and that's to his credit. But forward guidance has been a mistake, and a cacophony of Fed voices has confused markets and been harmful to the Fed's credibility and independence. A course correction is overdue. Who wants to be a trillionaire? The SpaceX IPO is a credit to Elon Musk and American capitalism. Shares in SpaceX skyrocketed following its record $75 billion initial public offering on Friday, apparently making Elon Musk the world's first trillionaire, at least on paper. In our political age of envy, the press and Democrats are preoccupied by his otherworldly wealth. But deserving more attention is how he has enriched the country by building a remarkable company. At the close of trading on Friday, SpaceX boasted a $2.1 trillion, yes, trillion dollar market valuation. The company raised $75 billion in its public debut, nearly 3 times more than the previous largest IPO, Saudi Aramco, in 2019. It will need that money and multiples more to achieve Mr. Musk's ambition of colonizing Mars and mining asteroids. If the IPO had happened in China, the press would be mourning America's economic decline. Instead, they are lamenting Mr. Musk's riches. Elon Musk is the world's first trillionaire, Bloomberg News writes. He could theoretically do a lot with all that money, like fund 68 U.S. election cycles or buy every car maker in the U.S., Europe, and Japan. The grievance mood is strong these days at Bloomberg and most of the rest of the financial press. Mr. Musk's wealth largely consists of shares in SpaceX and Tesla. Their current stratospheric values could crash if the companies fail or investors lose faith in Mr. Musk. And mom and pop investors should know the risks in buying SpaceX shares. In any event, Mr. Musk's wealth is a tribute to U.S. entrepreneurship and innovation, which are byproducts of its free market system. Mr. Musk, an immigrant from South Africa, launched the rocket company in 2002 with money he made from his PayPal startup. It is certainly hard to believe that little company that started in a warehouse in El Segundo is now going public with the largest IPO ever, he said Friday. SpaceX faced many early setbacks. Its Falcon 1 failed 3 times before reaching orbit in 2008. A few months later, NASA awarded SpaceX a contract to supply the International Space Station. SpaceX later developed reusable rockets that greatly reduce launch cost, which the Chinese are trying still to achieve. Its success, which came through trial and failure, has ended U.S. reliance on Russia to transport astronauts to the space station and launch American satellites. The company is the leading edge of what could be called the space economy. In 2015, SpaceX launched Starlink, an internet satellite company that has helped Ukraine resist Russia's invasion and dissidents living under authoritarian regimes like Iran to communicate. Mr. Musk this year merged his social media company X.com and XAI startup with SpaceX, providing them with a vehicle to go public. SpaceX has created thousands of jobs in working class communities where it operates. That includes Hawthorne, California, Bastrop and McGregor in Texas, Memphis, Tennessee, and South Haven, Mississippi. Its workers, including hourly blue-collar workers, receive stock options, which has allowed them to share in the company's success. By one estimate, the IPO has made millionaires of 4,400 SpaceX current and former employees, including 400 who hold shares worth more than $100 million. If you listen to union leaders and progressives, billionaires get rich by exploiting workers. SpaceX couldn't succeed without its workers, as it notes in its IPO prospectus, and they would leave if they felt abused. The IPO is giving workers and retail investors a chance to share in any future growth. It's also allowing venture investors to cash out and pour their windfalls into new startups working on innovations that could improve and even save lives. Example, cancer vaccines. Who knows which of these companies could someday be worth $1 trillion? With their envy of success and wealth, our political class ignores that financial rewards are what spur investors and entrepreneurs to take risks on companies that make all Americans better off. You don't have to like Mr. Musk to appreciate what he has built. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Washington may get a Mandani moment. An avowed Democratic Socialist leads in the polling for mayor. The nation's capital is in the throes of a mayoral election, and buckle up. The apparent frontrunner is Washington, D.C.'s June 16th Democratic primary is a Zoran Mandani light, setting up what could become a confrontation with the Trump administration. The seat is open after Muriel Bowser, who counts as sane and effective by Washington standards, decided not to run for a fourth term. The frontrunner in the polls to replace her is Janice Lewis George, proudly affiliated with the Democratic Socialist of America. Kenyon McDuffie, a more conventional Democrat for better and worse, is in second. The winner of the Democratic primary is all but a shoo-in come the general election in November. This sets the stage for the district's Mandani moment. Miss Lewis George isn't promising government-run supermarkets as the New York mayor is, but she does want to build 72,000 new housing units within 5 years while expanding rent control. A centerpiece of this program is a pledge to ramp up government-owned housing construction. She promises a universal child care subsidy. She tried to pay for this with a new tax on the incomes of people who own businesses in the district but live in Virginia or Maryland. In theory, she says this would raise $500 million. In practice, it would chase lobbyists and law firms into offices across the city line. Miss Lewis George also sounds determined to unlearn the lessons of recent years on urban crime and policing. While nodding to the need for more police on the streets, she'd oppose policies such as a youth curfew intended to thwart violent mob swarms of teens organized by social media. Her record as a prosecutor was marked by her enthusiasm for pretty much any policy other than throwing criminals into jail. Mr. McDuffie is normal by comparison. He talks a good game about the need to attract more investment to the district by avoiding punishing tax increases. He may even understand how the property development industry works, as demonstrated by his more modest home building target, 12,000. Yet neither candidate seems fully alert to the district's dire demographic, economic, and fiscal straits. Washington never recovered from the pandemic, and the Trump administration's federal job cuts have worsened the problem. Office vacancies are up, population growth is slowing, and government tax revenue is flat. This may explain why both candidates are falling back on running against President Trump, who has meddled in district governance to a greater extent than any president in decades. But the dirty secret around town is that his efforts to beautify city parks, get fountains working again, and deploy the National Guard to deter crime are popular even in this deep blue city. That will make Washington a flashpoint in the conflict between far-left urban governance and a more conservative national electorate. If no one else can govern Washington, Mr. Trump might. Primary voters are on notice. From the opinion pages, the race for hypersonic missiles. The U.S. is catching up to China, thanks in part to Colorado-based Ursa Major. By Andy Kessler. The race for hypersonic missiles. China fields roughly 600 hypersonic missiles, according to a military assessment leaked last year. Hypersonic means Mach 5, 5 times the speed of sound. Last month, Russia hit Kyiv with a hypersonic missile. In 2021, Raytheon's Gregory Hayes warned that we are at least several years behind on hypersonic weapons. Can America catch up? Colorado-based Ursa Major is helping close the gap. Founded in 2015 by Joe Laurenti, a former SpaceX and Blue Origin propulsion engineer, it provided rocket engines for commercial launches. Back then, there were lots of startups building rockets. But in 2023, funding dried up. I spoke with the company's current CEO, Chris Spagnoletti, who explained you had a lot of these small launch companies say, "Oh my God, unless we've got Elon's capital, this won't work." Ursa Major, now employing roughly 350, pivoted to defense contracting. They make solid and liquid-fueled engines using additive manufacturing, basically 3D printing of metals. We print very complicated geometries that could withstand pressure and temperature, Mr. Spagnoletti says. They're highly scalable and manufacturable. Another example of commercial technology adapted for military use, much like drones. Solid fuel engines are like candles. They burn using oxygen and run until they're expended, and are used in Patriot, and Tomahawk missiles. Liquid fuel rockets, on the other hand, can be cycled on and off and combine an oxidizer, like cryogenic liquid oxygen, often with liquid hydrogen. The SpaceX Falcon 9 uses liquid kerosene. The Navy wants solid fuel rocket engines for missile replenishment, but the real magic comes from an innovative liquid fuel rocket design that the Air Force Research Laboratory asked for. Mr. Spagnoletti says the Air Force asked to make sure the weapon is storable, it's tactical, that when you fill it up, you leave in a bunker for 5 to 10 years, you can ship it in. He suggested that today no munitions use liquid fuel engines. So Ursa Major created its own missile called Havoc. We use our own oxidizer, hydrogen peroxide, so it doesn't need to breathe air. He adds that you can launch it in the atmosphere and go up to echo-atmospherically at altitudes where the air is too thin for turbojets. Because it's liquid fueled, you can deep throttle it, you can turn it way down, you can turn it off, you can turn off and on an infinite number of times. So you can change direction and altitude. Yes, all of it, Mr. Spagnoletti says. Because of that variability and thrust, it makes that munition highly survivable and highly adaptable. Because of 3D printing, when you reduce heat loading on a very fast munition, you take out a ton of cost and complexity without sacrificing performance. The Air Force wanted it fast, so remarkably, they set up a 1-year program last year, the Affordable Rapid Missile Demonstrator. I've never seen a government organization lean as hard as they did, Mr. Spagnoletti says. They helped us get on the range, they helped us write procedures, they helped remove red tape. I've never seen that before. We moved really fast, a contract in May of last year, and we're flying in January. Another test took place in March. High-end hypersonic strike missiles from Lockheed Martin and RTX can cost $15 million each or more. At the low end, Mr. Spagnoletti estimates that the Blackbeard from Castillon costs $200,000 to $400,000 each, but with none of the maneuverability. Havoc will cost $2 million to $3 million a shot. The military needs all tiers. As for Havoc, Mr. Spagnoletti says, it causes the adversary to have a ton of calories and cost to defend against it because it's unpredictable. Because of 3D metal printing, weapons replenishment can happen quickly after an Iran-like shooting match. It sure feels as if we won't be behind on hypersonic missiles for long. You've been listening to a reading of the Wall Street Journal, June 15th, 2026 edition. Your reader has been Corrine. Thank you for listening.